I'm now going to be doing the drawing stage of this portrait. So as previously mentioned, I've set up my reference so it's next to my painting surface, and I hardly have to move my eyes to look from the surface to the reference. I've put out my paints, but to be honest, initially I'm just going to be using one colour, possibly two, and the colour I normally use to paint or draw with is burnt umber. It's just quite a neutral colour, and you can thin it down so it works quite well as a sort of a drawing tool, really. I sometimes use a few other colours to accent certain areas, but I start with the burnt umber. So I'm just going to take a small amount of the burnt umber. This is a tiny brush. It's a 2-0, so it's a very tiny brush. And all I'm doing is I'm adding some of my thinners. So here's my thinners in my little jar lid, and I'm dipping my brush into there and adding it to the burnt umber paint. And for the drawing purposes, I just need to thin this paint down quite a bit. When I move on to painting, this consistency will be a lot thicker. But the idea is I've got this fluid, liquidy paint that I can use to draw with. So the other thing I have is a piece of kitchen towel or rag, and I just dip it into my white spirit. So my white spirit jar, which is just there, I'll dip it in there. And then this sort of acts like an eraser or rubber to wipe out any marks that I think aren't right. So the first stage when I'm doing a drawing is to look at or think about where I want that face to sit on this surface. So I think about where the top of the head's going to be, where the chin's going to be, and the width as well. So it might be that I want to crop the top of the head, for example, or I want to make the face really big. So I think about that first. But for this lesson, I'm just going to mark the top of where I want the hair to be. So the top of the head, I think it wants to be around about there. So I'm just making a small mark with my burnt umber paint. And then in the same way, I'm just going to mark where I want the chin to be. So if that's where the head is, top of the head, I think I want the chin to be around here. So if you are a complete beginner to drawing, it might be easier for you to have the same size reference as your painting. So you'd paint it the same size. It would just make measuring and lining up a lot easier. Mine's going to be slightly scaled up, which is fine. Okay, so once I've marked the top of the head and where I think the chin's going to be, I'll also mark where the width of the head's going to be. So I'm thinking about, if that's the top and bottom, the sides are going to be around here and around here. So as you can see, it's very rough, and I'm only just tentatively putting these marks on just to show me roughly where those guidelines are going to be. Once I've done that mark, I can start thinking about joining that sort of overall shape up. So that's the top of the head. The hair is just around here. So you're just always looking at the angle. So look at that angle that the hair makes and just trying to place a mark where you think that would be. And then coming down lower onto the face, think about, so here I'm going to put a little mark where I think this sort of jawline. So this was the hair, the width of the hair. Here I'm going to put a little mark further in, showing where the sort of jawline is on both sides. So both sides we've got a little bit of a gap there. And then once I've got that, I can start to suggest where the shape of that jawline. So we've got this quite straight coming down there, and then there's quite a sort of sharp angle. If you want help with the angles, use another brush maybe and just hold it up against that angle. It might help you to see or compare the angle with what you're looking at. So that's one side, and then the other side will be a similar method. Look at the angle that way and then that way. So you're looking at this, that's almost vertical, but not quite. So think about things like that. So we've got that straight-ish angle, and then the jaw comes round. Think about that angle as well. Okay, it's all looking very rough because that's how we want it to look at the moment. We've just got a very rough shape for the lower part of his face. We've got a rough position of where the hair would be. Now, before we go any further with the outer edges of the face, I'm just going to think about the position of the eyes, because it's only once you've got the features in position that you can check that those the overall structure is right. So, because this is quite a sort of symmetrical and sort of forward-facing portrait, you can see that if I put a line down the middle there, between his eyebrows, between the middle part of his lips and his nose, you can see that that's almost symmetrical, so that you can see almost an equal amount either side of that central line. So what I'll do now is just put a line down the centre. I generally just obviously do it by eye. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's just a rough guide. And then the eyes will form a sort of cross with that line. So if you hold your brush where the eyes are, and maybe use another brush just to check. So if you hold one brush along the middle line of his eyes, and then use another brush to just check the distance. So this is checking the length from the eyes downwards to his chin. So that's how long that is. And if you hold it up, you can just about see. It would be probably halfway if we ignored that bit of fluff of his hair at the top. So that gives you an idea of roughly where the eyes would be. So if I just imagine that that's where his sort of top part of his hair would be, I'm going to make a mark about halfway. If you want to use something to help you, such as a piece of card, you can do that. So for example, if I think that's where I think it's going to be, that halfway mark, you can check it with your piece of card. So that's going to be about there. Maybe it's a little bit lower, so we're going to go halfway. So it doesn't have to be spot on, but I normally do these sort of things by eye, but if you're not sure about that, then use something to help you. So that's where I'm going to put in the centre line for his eyes. And again, because he's looking straight at us, he's not tipping his head either way, then that eye line will be very horizontal. So that's our eye line, and that's our centre line. So it forms a sort of cross. So now we can start drawing the features on. So now that I've got the cross, I will start drawing the features. As I said before, this is just a very rough guide for the width of the head. But if we take that as being the width, we can look at the width of the eyes, and again, either with a piece of card or your paintbrush, you can check things like the width. So if that's the width of the eye here, it's about there like that. And you can see that that's about the same as the width from the side of the head to the corner of the eye. And then if you move that along, you can see that that middle section is slightly wider. That's about the same, and then that's about the same again. So it's almost divided into 5, apart from that middle section, which is a little bit wider. So I'm just going to plot those points on the width of the head. So all I've done now is marked points for where the corners of the eye are positioned. They're very rough, but they look about right to me because I've measured those distances. So that middle gap is a little bit longer. The other two distances are similar to each other. So once I've drawn those marks in, I can actually draw out the actual eyes. So they're along that central line. I'm looking at the proportions based on the photo reference, and I'm making sure that they are parallel to each other, in line with each other. And I'm looking very carefully at the exact angles and shapes of that lower lid, the upper lid, and so on. So once you've done one eye, think about how the other one relates to it. So is it a little bit bigger? Is it angled slightly differently? Make sure they line up roughly the same. So often eyes are different from each other, but just make sure they're roughly the same shape. And try and stick to those points you drew on earlier. So that's a very rough shape for the outline of his eyes. I'm going to put in a suggestion of the eyelid. This one's a little bit closer to his eye and it's very dark. And then I'm going to suggest the pupils as well, and irises, obviously. Make sure once you've done one eye that the other one is in keeping with the first one. So you're just making sure they're roughly the same shape. Okay, so that's a very rough suggestion of those eyes. Once you've done the eyes, you can either now or a bit later put the eyebrows. I normally do them around now. So think about all those sort of lines that are not very obvious lines, but where that top part of the nose is. So that's almost lined up with that upper part of the eyelids. And it forms almost like the shadow shape for the eyebrow. So that's the top part of the nose. Look at the width or the depth between the eyelid and the eyebrow. I'm going to just mark that. That's the gap between the eyebrow and eyelid, and then that's the eyebrow itself. And look at this very sort of specific angle that eyebrow makes, that way and that way. And try to start sort of suggesting that. And also look at where that eyebrow ends. Is it in line with the corner of the eye? Is it in line that way? It's actually sort of curved. It goes beyond the outer edge, but it stops at the same point as the inner edge. So that gives you a guide for that, this side. And then the outer edge, it sort of curves a little bit round, doesn't it? And then sort of fades off a bit. There's often eyebrows aren't that definite. There's no sort of hard lines usually. Well, there are sometimes, but not always. So then once you've done one eyebrow, move along to the other side. So again, look at where that eyebrow starts in relation to the eye, the corner of the eye. So again, it's a bit vague, but it starts around there and it's lined up with the other side as well. So use what you've drawn already to help you draw the next element of your portrait. Okay, so that's very roughly where the eyes and eyebrows are going to be. Then once you've drawn the eyes and eyebrows, I would normally go on to draw the nose. So we've very roughly got those eyes drawn. But what I sometimes say to people is, instead of looking at the length of the nose, think about how that side of the nose works in relation to the lower part of the eyes. So you've got the eyes already there, so use them to help you paint the nose. So I'm just going to look at that gap between the lower eyelid and the outer edge of the nose. So looking at it this side, I'm just looking at that. So how long is that distance from there to there? I'm doing it by eye, but you can use different methods to measure it, so you can compare it to that, say for example, the distance from the lower eyelid to the top of the eyebrow. You could check, is that similar in distance? That it actually is very similar, isn't it? So you can use what you've drawn already to help you. So that's going to be the outer edge. So I don't normally use sort of measurement tools like that, but if you want to use card or paper or even rulers if you want to help you, there's no problem. I usually use like paintbrushes just to check where things line up. So you can see the outer edge of the nostril is almost in line. If you hold your brush against that central line and move it across, that outer edge is almost in line with the corner, but a little bit wider. So I'm looking at the other side as well. So that's one side of the nose. The other side will, as we did with the eyes, you can use this side to help you, but I'm also going to look at where that outer edge of the nostril lines up with the corner. And again, it's slightly out from the corner. So I'm just going to put that mark about there. And then once you've got those outer edges, you can use those to draw the end of your nose. So we know that that's where or roughly where the nose is going to be. Now we've got that, we can mark the end of the nose. So that's going to be positioned on the central line. And if you look, it's slightly lower than the nostril, the outer edge of the nostril. So I'm going to put the mark around there. So that's the end of the nose. And then the nostrils will sit just above there. And always keep the nostrils quite, often people make them a bit bigger than they need to be. So his in particular are quite flat and thin. There's not much to them really. We'll come back to the nose a bit later. I'm just going to use my handy bit of white spirit on a rag to wipe that a little bit. It's just a bit of a big mark there, and I want to get that detail a bit better. So you just wipe off, and then you can quite quickly go over the top again. Okay. Now I'm going to just start looking at the other features, so the mouth and the ears and so on. So now we've got the nose in position. I'm just trying to suggest the sort of shape of the nose itself. So we've got that lower part of the shape, the nose. So this would all be in shadow here. And then you've got the nostrils coming round a little bit. So just trying to get some sort of suggestion of that, the nose shape. And then you've got the width of the nose as well. Okay, moving on to the mouth. So we've now got the eyes and the nose. So those features will help you to draw the other features as well. So looking at the corners of the mouth, think about where the corners line up with the eyes. So using that central line, move it across and think about where that corner of the mouth lines up. It's almost in line with the pupils. So if we put a mark around where we think it's going to be, in line with that pupil. It's going to be around there. This is just by eye at the moment, but you can always adjust that later. The other one, again, look at the corner of the mouth. It's basically the same as well. So that's going to be our pupil there. And we can line that up. Okay. So that's very roughly the sort of corners of the mouth. But you can do things like you can check the depth of, or that width, that length, sorry, from the end of the nose to the middle of the mouth. So you've got that as your little measurement there. And check it against other things like maybe the distance from the top of the eyebrow down. So you can use something you've already drawn to help you do something else. So I'm going to check that by looking at, that's my measurement. I know that that's going to be roughly the middle of the mouth. So that's going to be my center line for the mouth. It's slightly curved as well. So from that outer corner, we're going slightly down, only slightly. And then this one's a little bit more parallel or horizontal. When you've done the center line, you can draw the lips. Don't make them too heavy because they may change as you go along. The lower lip is a bit bigger than the upper lip, so we can think about that. And I'm constantly looking at the sort of the angles that the mouth makes and so on. So it's only around now that I'm realizing that the jaw is a little bit too heavy. So what we can do now is take our white spirit again and just remove that jawline, because as I said in the first stage, it was just a rough guide. I've now got the features how I want them. I think this mouth needs to be a little bit lower. Once you've got the features sort of in place, you can use those to create the better outer shape. So starting at the top, I'm happy with that width. Maybe it could come in a little bit closer. And then what I'm doing now is I'm looking at that feature and what that distance is from the outer edge of the nose, the outer edge of the eyes and the mouth, and how it relates to that outer edge of the face. So this comes in a lot closer, doesn't it? So we can draw that again. Look at that distance from here to here. It's much narrower, isn't it? So it does mean his chin is not as low down as I first put it, but that's okay because it was only a rough guide anyway. And then coming across to this side, we've got again, that's just in the wrong place now. So we're just adjusting this side as well to make it work with the other side. Always look at the angles, look at the distance from that outer edge to the side of the face. Look at the distance from the corner of the mouth to here. Okay, we're starting to get a better shape for his face. I'm now coming up a little bit higher, narrowing in a little bit around the sort of temple, because that naturally goes a little bit narrower. And now we can really think about the overall outer shape as well. So we've got that, the forehead, which is going to be around here. So now we've got the eyebrows in position. We can think about how high that forehead would be. And it's always you're looking at in relation to everything else you've drawn. So think about that forehead and how it relates to the other part of the face. And look at the distance. So there's our eyebrows. How far up does that hairline come? And now you can look at the top part. So I think I'm fairly happy with the height of the hair, but now you can just look at the sort of shape that it makes. So coming down this way, we've got the hair coming around here. We've got the forehead or the temple around here, and then that hair comes round. And you've, again, look at what you've drawn already. So look at how the eyebrow lines up with that sort of little bit of hair sticking out there. And where does the hair end? Does it end around just below the eye? So that's where the hair is. Coming to the other side, we've got the hair coming over the top of the forehead slightly. And then look at what happens around this side. So it comes a little bit closer to the head. It's similar to the other side. So you've got that same sort of shape on the other side. And again, look at where the hair ends. So that just comes around, ends around where the edge, the corner of the eye is. So that's about there. So before we go any further, I'm going to add the ears. So the ears are fairly easy to draw because you've done all the features already. So you can line them up. So think about where do the ears line up? If you put your paintbrush across, you can see that it's, they're slightly different. He must be slightly tipped his head, or he's got ears in the different positions, but you can see that one is slightly higher, in line with sort of the tip of his nose, and that one, the lobe of his ear, and lines up with the nostrils, I suppose. So we can use that as our guide. So this side, it's around there that the earlobe ends. So that's where his earlobe is. And then on this side, it was more around the nostrils. So that was going to be around this side. So it's fine and absolutely normal for earlobes or ears to be a slightly different position. Look at how far they come out compared to what you've already painted. So they don't come out quite as far as the hair. So come out a little bit further and then come in. And then the other one, that's where it ends. You can just about see this little bit sticking out there. And then it almost lines up. You can hardly see what happens around the hair because it's in shadow a bit more. So you can just about make out that shape coming around here. Okay, that'll do, I think, for the ears. They'll come to life a bit more once we start painting. Okay, so now we've got the face. We're going to just roughly put in the shape of the neck and the shoulders. So with shoulders, you'll often find that, not with neck, with the neck, you often find that they're parallel to the sides of the face. So if you held your brush up against the side of the neck, you can just about see it's just in from the side of the face a bit more, both sides. And they're parallel. Try not to make the neck go narrower or wider. It's generally quite parallel. So I'm just going to tweak this a bit more. That line is a bit too heavy, so like before, I'm just going to fine tune it a bit better. Draw it more accurately. So now I've got that in better position. I'm looking at where the neck joins. Look at that point where it joins the, or meets the chin or jaw. It's around there. And then the other side, look at the point it meets. It's around there. Look at where the corner of the mouth is. It's around, maybe around there. So remember to keep it parallel. Don't pretend to sort of go narrower. It's fairly parallel. The hoodie or the jumper is, you can use that edge to just show you the shape of the neck. And this side is a bit lower and more in shadow. And then finally, we're looking at the shoulder. So he's wearing a hoodie, so you can just see that that's a bit higher than it would normally be. But again, use those points of the meeting points to help you. So I'm just going to put that in around there. That's the edge of the hoodie. And then a little bit higher there. And then finally, the shoulder. Use your brush to help you to get that guide. This angle is around that, around like that, so we can put that in. And then the other side, look at where that hoodie or jumper comes or meets the side of the neck. It's almost like that mark where the neck and jaw join, so that will help you. And then again, I can't really see what's going on, but there's sort of lumps of the hoodie coming around here. But think about what's going on behind there. So you've got that shoulder just behind there. At this point, I'm just looking at areas where I think I can improve the drawing or the likeness, and just tweaking certain bits to make sure that they're looking okay. So for example, I'm just comparing, say, this area around here, which doesn't look quite right. So what I'll do is take my bit of paper towel again. I'm just, when you see an area that doesn't work quite so well, just rub it out and redraw it. You know, it's not a big thing to do that. And it's almost best to do it now than later on. So I'm just looking at that angle and that, what shape that forehead makes. So it's just coming down a little bit of a sort of a more of a straighter or more vertical angle, I suppose. Comes out slightly further. And then the hair comes over the top. Sometimes it's just a case of being a little bit neater with things. When it's a bit too rough and ready, it's harder to see what's going on. Okay, I'm now looking at other areas, so maybe extending that or line there to suggest that shadow underneath the eye. I'm going to maybe make the nostrils slightly higher. I'm going to wipe out that corner of the mouth. I think that's just a bit too heavy. Again, it's just making it a little bit less dark there. So I'm redrawing that so it's not quite so heavy. Making sure the line is as accurate as it can be. Sometimes what I'll do is, as well as the burnt umber, I might use a little bit of a another colour, so maybe a tiny bit of a dark blue, for example, into that burnt umber, thinned out again. And what that does is it just defines some of the drawn lines a little bit better. So for example, if I've drawn the eyes, but if I want to draw them a little bit more accurately, you can use a different colour, and what you'll see is a sort of a sharper or more clear line. If you prefer a pointed brush rather than a short flat brush, that's fine. This does make quite sort of broad marks, so it's not so easy for some people. And the other thing is, this is just the way I prefer to do this, but some people would be much happier with a pencil, so that's fine as well. So I'm just defining these lines just a little bit better so that when I come to paint them, they're a bit more accurate. We've lost the end of his ear there, so I'm just going to redraw that. Okay. So now I'm looking at the overall drawing and just checking that some areas are accurate enough. That eye looks a little bit big there, so I'm just going to rub that out a little bit at the bottom. You can always do this sort of thing during the process of the painting, but I always recommend if you can do as much as you can at this stage, it does make life a little bit easier later. Just checking that nose is in the right position. You can also draw, if you want to, draw in sort of more rough areas for where the shadow's falling. So we've got this shadow under here. I don't tend to do that really because I'll just include that as part of my painting process. But if you prefer to draw in some of the main shadow areas, that's fine and quite helpful sometimes. I think I'm nearly there. I could do more detail, but I think I normally do the more detail during the painting stage. One final tip is if you want to, you don't have to, I take a little bit of a bit of rag and just remove some of those sort of guidelines like that aren't particularly helpful. So the centre line. You don't have to do this because you can paint over them quite easily. Any marks you think are not necessary anymore, you can just remove them. Sort of neaten up a few marks if you need to. And I think